Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August 2026 Advocacy Action Network meeting. It's great to see your pictures and or your smiling faces. Whatever suits you better, we'll take. Hope y'all are having a good summer and getting ready to get ready to start the school year here pretty soon. Doesn't that feel crazy to say already? It sure does to me. All right, we are going to get started. If you could, in the chat, just take a second to introduce yourselves in chat so that everyone knows who you are. Would love to have you share your name, your district, and how many years you've been on your board. That would be helpful to know. Daniel, your grandkids in Georgia started school yesterday. It's too early. It's too early. All right, so please introduce yourselves in the chat. And over the course of the next hour, our plan is essentially to go through the following topics. We're going to start with some learning from Daniel Lunghofer on our team, who is just incredible, about a couple of school funding topics, thinking about local effort assistance and regionalization, most specifically. And then we're going to prep a little bit for General Assembly. We have some updates and reminders for you all today. And then at the end, we'll have some discussion about sort of how interim is going for you, what some of your needs might be, and how we can step in to support those. And then we'll wrap up and get you out of here by 1 o'clock. Okay, thanks again for engaging in the chat. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn my screen off. And we're going to have Daniel jump in right away and share some updates. Daniel, take it away. I think you've got co-host.
So before I get started, hi everyone. Daniel Lunghofer with WSSDA. Been in school finance for 20 years now, making myself feel old.
Right.
I've been a school business manager, worked at OSPI in the past, and been here at WSSDA for over 6 years. So let me see about sharing my screen. And there we go. Logan asked me to be a ray of sunshine today and talk about the LEA funding cliff, which is coming up, and the regionalization rebase. So that's, a couple of very important topics coming up. So we'll start with the LEA cliff. So as a quick thing, so what is the LEA cliff? So the legislature in 2025, in the budget, the legislature added additional funding for levy equalization, local effort assistance, LEA, three terms, same thing, in the budget, specifically in Section 511, that certain portions of the state allocation were provided for an inflation enhancement under, of $150 per pupil in 2026 calendar year and $250 per pupil in 2027 calendar year. So without that impact, that extra $150, LEA cap per pupil for 2026 would be $2,071.58. But with that $150, it's $2,221.78 for 2026 levies. So most people that were getting LEA would see a benefit from this. This year in 2026, the legislature changed the language in the budget. They kept the 150 because everything had already been calculated. And then 2027's amount was lowered from $250 to $150 per student. There had been discussion as to whether or not there was an additional amount or whether it was just a continuation. Looks like they settled on it being a additional $150, so a total of $300 extra. And the 2027 LEA cap, according to OSPI's levy calculation sheet, is $2,431.77 per student. But there's a problem. And okay, is my screen still showing the what is it slide?
It is. It did not move on our end. Oh, now it did.
There we go. Okay,
There you
I see
go.
what I'm doing wrong. Okay, so let me just go back just so everyone can see those numbers. So 2025 law, LEA cap would have been 2,071.58, 2221.78 for levies, for 26 levies. Then there's $150, and there's that 2027 LEA cap. So now the problem is that budget bills get direct funding enhancements like they did with LEA. They did it a few years ago for portions of MSOC funding when they still had it broken out by line items. But budget bills do not revise the underlying statute. So any LEA enhancement either has to be continued year over year in the budget, written into law, or it goes away. It's not guaranteed. So there's nothing requiring the legislature to keep funding this year over year over year. So unless the legislature provides additional funding in the budget or somehow revises the statute to include it, the additional $300 combined enhancement for LEA goes away for 2028 levies, and the LEA cap drops to $2,178.78. So this is obviously very precipitous. That's why we're calling it an LEA cliff. So to put it graphically, because some people like graphs better. So here's what LEA looks like. So start on the left with the blue. This is 2025 LEA. And 2026 got a little bit of enhancement for inflation, then the $150 enhancement. And then 2027, the inflation, the base was added. There's a new base because it includes last year's plus the inflation amount. There's the new inflation. There's the enhancement. And then in 2028, new base is that year plus a little bit of inflation that the legislature is doing. To focus it down a little bit more to kind of see this, because the last slide has it from base 0, there's 25, there's 26, a little bit of enhancement, a little bit of inflation, big enhancement. 2027, increased base, inflation, enhancement, and then 2028 is base plus a little bit of inflationary. So when we're talking about the cliff, that's graphically what we're looking at, is that cap just drops. So what does it mean? So what I did is I took OSPI's levy spreadsheet that they have posted on their budget page, and just took and ran maximum LEA numbers for 2027 and 2028. And the reason why I had to run the maximum numbers is the spreadsheet also looks at any actual levies that are in place, and some districts' levies expire next year, so they technically don't have one for 2028 yet. So no levy means no levy equalization. So that's if I ran it on the projected actual numbers, it would highly inflate the LEA cap. So the total maximum for LEA in 2027, there you can see $354.2 million. For 2028, that total drops down to $226 million. So it's a drop of $128 million, 36% of all LEA funding gone, just like that. Because, and unless the legislature, funds an increase, changes the law or whatever, that is the reality of what's going to happen. When we break it down by district, 137 districts don't have LEA, so this doesn't impact them. Good for them. 30 districts will end up losing all of their LEA funding between 2027 and 2028. Now, some of these is because they're right up against that cap anyway, so they're not talking a huge amount, but it's still loss of funding. Then my little table there, 44 districts will lose less than a quarter of their LEA. 54 will lose between a quarter and half. 21 between a half and 3/4, and then 9 will lose more than 3/4, but not quite all of their levy funding, of their LEA funding. So, when we talk about advocacy, what can be done? So, your business office will probably have more up-to-date numbers that you can ask them for and share with your legislators about, okay, this is what this impact is going to be for us. And you can either ask them to add the enhancement to the law, similar to the levy enhancement that they added a couple of years ago, where they continue to provide the enhancement in the budget. And just be honest, be forthright. This LEA cliff is going to cost our district X number of dollars. You know, it's it's a large hit to absorb with all the other costs that we have to do. So, uh, and I say have your business office run the numbers. They may be looking at 2028 levy amounts. If you're getting ready to run a levy, uh, in February, they might be starting to look at those amounts. So that way they can get actual LEA numbers because mine was based on, like I said, the total maximum possible LEA. So before I go on, are there any questions?
Daniel, I've got two questions in the chat and then maybe Marisa after that. Marisa, sorry, I got two in the chat first. So Daniel, I'll read them out to you. The first question is, do all districts get some LEA funds if they have a levy?
The answer to that is no. So levy caps, the short and sweet of it, levy caps are based either on a per pupil amount, a maximum of a per pupil amount, or $2.50 per $1,000 of assessed value. Whichever is lower, that's your maximum levy. LEA is based on looking at the levy that your district would raise at $1.50 per thousand, and then looking at your per pupil amount and comparing it to that LEA cap. So if your district receives, let me circle back up off screen. So without, so if your district receives it this year, sorry, Daniel talking, take two. 2026 LEA cap is, it's called $2,200 per student. If your levy at $1.50 per thousand would get you $2,000 per student, then the LEA cap, then you get $221 of LEA funding per student. If your levy amount calculates to $2,300, then you're over that cap and you would get no LEA funding. So no, not all districts with a levy will receive LEA funds, but you don't get LEA funds unless you have run a levy.
Thank you. And then the other question is, where would we find if our district does receive LEA funding? Or how would we know?
So you can talk with your district's business office, or if you really want to, you can go to OSPI's website and look on apportionment reports, and look through all the detail and look for specific revenue code for levy funding. But unless you really enjoy sitting through all those pages of all the calculations on apportionment and levy, I would just say talk to your district's business office and say hey, do we receive LEA funding? If so, how much? And then you can even ask them, have you looked at what's going to happen when the extra LEA funding goes away? That LEA cliff.
Great, thank you. All right, next we'll go to Marisa, and then after Marisa, we've got one more in the chat.
Daniel, thank you so much for presenting this topic. I'm Marisa from University Place School District, and I have noticed that this position has not consistently made it up among the top of our WSSDA priorities, legislative priorities. I think it is a huge, it presents a huge impact to certain school districts, but there are, what did you say, 137 districts are not even affected by it. That's out of 295. And so I think it's really difficult. I guess it's more of a position. It's really difficult to get this in front of our legislative representatives and school districts to understand what a big deal this is. And with only, 32 participants on this call, again, out of 295 school districts, again, it's one of those things that has a significant impact on certain school districts in the state, and yet we can't seem to do anything more, to jump up and down and, meet with our legislators. Some of us already do that, but to really, prioritize this among our positions that we need the legislature to fix. So I just wanted to address that and see if you have any insight as to what OSPI is doing or what's going on, what we can do with our education partners, again, to really bring this up in front of everyone's attention.
So do I have any idea what OSPI is doing? No. I will be completely honest there. Um, I know that they're aware of it, and they're looking at it and saying, okay, what is the impact? As for the education partners, um, I would imagine, you know, uh, uh, that WASA, the Superintendent's Association, I'm sure that they're aware of this coming cliff. WASBO is. But of course, some of those districts aren't looking down to 2028 yet. They're focusing on, let's get the next year going, close out this year, get the next year going, and we'll deal with 2028 next year. But they are aware, they're aware of it. It needs to be, you know, I, I think those three organizations really need to work together to come up with a coherent message about what the impacts are, you know, and what districts will be affected because the legislators in Seattle, well, Seattle doesn't get LEA funding, whereas those that cover like the Yakima Valley or southern Thurston County, northern Lewis County, places like that, those legislators really need to know, hey, this is going to negatively impact our district. Can you please help?
And maybe what I'll add to that, Daniel, is the education partners, OSPI, everyone is like very aware of the issue. We are all elevating it with legislators when we talk to them. So legislators are becoming more and more aware. And for those of you that have been really engaged with us last session, a lot of our conversation in the 2026 session was, hey, you need to codify this in a bill because in 2025, right, where Daniel's presentation started, the legislature made a promise that with raising the levy lid, they would also make sure to be, subsequently raising local effort assistance so that there's an equalization there. And so our districts who do rely on LEA don't fall farther behind. So the legislature is very aware that they need to act on this, and we are continuing to talk to them about the importance of doing so during the 2027 session. Um, Given the sort of state of revenue, it's unclear where the legislature will necessarily lie here. But in terms of conversations with ed partners, legislators, etc., um, it comes up pretty frequently. Okay, and then Daniel, I think you've got one more question on LEA from Lisa Guthrie in the chat. Hi, Lisa. She is asking with levy lid non-LEA inflationary increases essentially compound year over year. Is it the same for LEA or is it just calculated year to year?
Okay, so let me share my screen again. Uh, so So here's the slide that I shared on, the focus portion of the LEA components. So, here's 2025's level, then 2026. Let's see if I can scribble on this a little bit. So here's 2025, carry it over, and there's the new, and it carries over, then here's inflation. And 2026, carry this over, and there's the new base. And then 2027 gets inflation. This carries over into the new base. So yes, inflation does compound year over year. And one of the things that they did with um, the enhancement for between 26 and 27 is it looks like, and maybe I was looking at it wrong, that they possibly included this enhancement in when they calculated the inflationary pressure, the inflationary enhancement for 2027. But still, when you get to 2028, it's just, the inflation plus inflation plus inflation.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay. So then let's go on to talk about regionalization. Let's turn it off. Okay, so the regionalization rebase. So first, a little bit of history. The McCleary bill, um, because it solved all of our problems, added this wonderful thing called regionalization based on average home prices within a district. And I put within in quotation marks because there's language about, proximate districts and within 15 miles and everything. But we're just, you know, for ease of discussion purposes, we're just going with, property home prices within a district. And so depending on how much above the state average they're ranked and either get 6, 12, or 18% additional state funding to the amount that districts receive. And it also included the 2023 legislature and every 4 years thereafter shall review and rebase regionalization factors. And then for the McCleary bill also stated that to aid the legislature in reviewing and rebasing, the Department of Revenue shall, by November 1st, 2022, and by November 1st, every 4 years thereafter, determine the single family value of each school district. So the Department of Revenue is required to, by November 1st of this year, post updated single family values within each school district. And there's a little asterisk there. Originally, the McCleary bill had it every 6 years, but the McCleary fix bill dropped it down to every 4 years. So by November 1st, Department of Revenue will have median home prices for every school district available on their data and statistics page. But wait, there's more. So statutory language 28A 154.12 also requires the legislature to review and rebase compensation amounts by comparing it to actual school district compensation data. What other inflationary measure is the most representative of actual market experience? Because right now they're using the implicit price deflator, which
Not yet. Need more time this summer.
So the IPD increases prices, but not as fast as the consumer price index. That's why the legislature prefers it. They also have to review and rebase other economic information. And the very last sentence of subsection 1 is the legislature shall revise the minimum allocations, regionalization factors, inflationary pressure, and inflationary measures. I gotta throw on highlighter. Inflationary measures, if necessary, to ensure that state basic education allocations continue to provide market rate salaries, blah, blah, blah. So the important words there are that if necessary. So what does this really mean? So by law, the 2027 legislature must examine and rebase compensation, regionalization, and inflation. But we're trying to figure out exactly who does what on this process. Department of Revenue has to have median home values, but what does the legislature have to do with them after that? Are there any other, what do they use for rebasing salaries? How much would they rebase them by? And also, could they? One thing that's up in the air is a question about, well, could they just say, okay, we've looked at the data. We think that all the measures are fine, inflationary measures are fine, and so we don't need to make any changes. Can they do that? That's a big question, but that language about the changes being if necessary throws that into question. So what should we do? So until the Department of Revenue releases new school district property value data, the potential impact isn't known. The last data that they have is the 2022 median home price data. So that won't give us any information about, okay, what potential changes are there to regionalization factors. This next one is a little bit of based on recent history, we can say that unless it saves money in the budget, they might not want to change the values because we know that the state budget is tight. They're having to look at everything. So if doing a rebase costs them extra money, then they might not change the values. They may just say we do not deem it necessary at this time to rebase the values. But work with the legislators in this case to encourage them to actually review the data and make changes. And I would say I would put a little caveat, if it benefits your district, if right now your district's getting the 6%, but when the new data comes out and everything is calculated, your district goes down to, loses regionalization, well, then maybe you don't want to tell your legislators to make the changes. But if you go from nothing to 6% or 6 to 12, then um, you might want to consider working with your legislators to make those changes. But again, we won't have it until they release the new school district property value data. And right now, I'm not sure who would do the actual publishing of projected regionalization factors. Whether that's Department of Revenue, probably not OFM, LEAP committee, the legislature. It goes back to we're trying to figure out who does what in this process.
Mm. Can I add one more thing to just that last bullet point about talking with legislators about this? I think if there's one thing I would underscore here specifically on regionalization, it would be that. Because the other thing that we have realized over the years, right, is that the formula that the legislature has in place on regionalization doesn't really work. For example, no district east of the Cascade Mountain Range currently gets regionalization. That seems like something that they might want to consider changing. Um, there are districts that border each other that are neighbors that have different regionalization rates. That makes staffing really complicated. So there are lots of sort of layers to this formula that make it really complex. And I think what is important for you all to know is that many legislators might not really understand the details of the regionalization formula, how it might impact districts within their legislative district. So please be out there talking to legislators about this, especially if this impacts you. And then also, you should know that some of us in the education sort of partner space are working to try to get a work session during the next legislative session, or maybe even during committee days in December before the legislative session starts on the regionalization issue, as to sort of help educate them and the budget committees that are going to have to deal with this next session about the impacts. So.
So are there any final questions? Put them in the chat, raise your hand. There's my email if you want to send me an email and ask me a question. I can provide you general information about, like, what, what your LEA impact would be, but I may not have data, so your school district school district business office would be the better people to give you more accurate and specific information for your district. But if you do have any questions, there's my email, and feel free to reach out. So I'll leave this up, and we'll give it a little bit more. Oh, we do have some chats. Oh, will my slide deck be sent out?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're willing to share it with us, Daniel.
Yeah. Nothing in there is not factual. And I include sources on like how I did my calculations. So.
Ooh, you do have one more question from Dave about, are there any other indicators other than housing costs that could be used for regionalization?
That is a good question. And my inclination is to say no, based on why they set up regionalization kind of in the first place. So part of the thing about regionalization is acknowledging that, some districts it just costs more to live in. It costs more to live in Bellevue than it does to Nino. And it costs more to live in Olympia than it does to Nino. So that's so you know so the idea is, okay, if it's going to cost people more to live in those districts, then they should get paid more money to help them afford to live in their district. Now you get the problem of, okay, well, someone who lives in a district that gets 12% like Federal Way can, hop over the border, to Highline or, nearby, Kent, Highline, ones like that, and, get the 18%, even though they still live where there's 12%. I'm not sure off the top of my head of what might be a uh, better indicator for housing costs. The only other thing that you could think of would be changing it from regionalization as an enhancement to reflect cost of living to some variation based on free and reduced price lunch data. So that way higher poverty districts get an enhancement factor, compared to the non-high poverty districts, especially those that can't, raise a levy because of the cap. They're stuck at the $2.50 per thousand if their voters will approve it.
Thanks, Daniel. It's a good question, Dave, that I think a lot of us are asking ourselves and pondering as to what other indicators could be used. One other thing I'll say while Daniel's still here, Daniel, in case there's anything you want to say about this, is that you as WSSDA members do have a couple of references to regionalization in your member adopted positions. One of them being specific in that it directs some advocacy around ensuring that no school district is adjacent to another with a difference of regionalization factors greater than 2%. So that would be that like neighboring district smoothing, if you will. That's the word that I'm going to use here today. And so Daniel and our team are working together to kind of model what something like that would look like in terms of districts and what something like that would cost. I imagine the cost would be pretty significant, so probably really hard for this year. But just so you know, we are interested in kind of modeling out what that member adopted position could look like as sort of one suggestion for how the legislature might navigate this. Is there anything you want to say on that, Daniel?
Yeah. So, I started taking a look. You know, I'm sure many of you have seen the wonderful maps that WSDA puts out. I'm the guy that puts out those maps. I'm the guy that creates them. So I started taking a look and saying, okay, here's regionalization, and then what does it look like, if we try to smooth it out. So I will share with you this working document. This is not a finalized document. This is a working document only. So do not take this as any sort of final, gospel truth or anything. And okay, so this is my working document. So here's what regionalization looks like right now based on the LEAP document. Very heavily concentrated, King County, Snohomish County, and then farther out. I've done 8 passes where I basically go in and say, okay, these 2 districts border one another. Then there should, starting from the center, working my way out of, should be no more than a 2% difference, with the exception of like natural borders, like, here's the border of the central is the border of the Cascades. So obviously, you're not going to have people, driving over White Pass or Snoqualmie Pass or Stevens Pass every day to go from work to home. Similarly, over in the Olympic Peninsula, you know, some of the districts that may border each other, they're separated by the vast distances on the Olympic Peninsula because there's no good cross route there. So I kind of took those out of my computation. So here's kind of what it looks like. Again, this is just a working document, not final. I'm sure I've missed some in there somewhere. And you just see that, okay, it just kind of it's bled out. it's seeped out. There's all the central Puget Sound area, then everything up from Clark County. This all comes down. Then I extended Easton and some of these districts over here. So this is a rough draft pass, eighth pass of what it might look like if we were trying to keep to the no more than 2%. But again, I probably missed something in there, and I'm sure I could probably sit and stare at this for a couple more hours and fine tune it. But that's kind of what it would look like if we were to start doing this. Is just have to pick a starting point and branch out from there.
Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. It looks like we have one more question, and then we'll get you on your way. Also from Lisa, who is looking at the regionalization factors spreadsheet at OSPI, asking if regionalization ranges from 6 to 18%, why might some districts show 22%?
Because, so if you look at the total regionalization for central for certificated administrative staff and classified staff, it's either 6, 12, or 18%. Certificated instructional staff, aka teachers, nurses, positions like that, can get an extra 4% enhancement. This is so before they fixed the structure, every teacher used to be placed on a staffing matrix based on the total amount of years of experience and highest education. Bachelor plus 15 credits plus 30, etc. Masters plus 45, masters plus 90, and then like 0 to 16 years of experience. Everything had a value from 1.0 for a starting teacher to 1.88 something for a teacher master's at 90. And so the more your district was skewed towards teachers with more experience and higher education, the higher your staff mix factor would be. And that staff mix factor was multiplied by the allocation amount to give you, your allocation. When they fixed it with McCleary, they kind of got away from that. So one of the things that they did after a little while was they said, okay, we will take a look at districts whose years of, average years of experience and average number of teachers with, more than a bachelor's degree. We'll look at those, and if a district exceeds the statewide average in both of those areas, then they get an extra 4%. To make up for that, missing enhanced staff mix factor. And that is applied only to certificated instructional staff, as I said. Central admin, classified staff, they don't get that enhancement. It's just for certificated instructional staff.
Great. Daniel, thank you so much for helping us take some really complicated, fiscal wonk, policy areas and helping us to break them down in some more simple ways. So we appreciate you. I just dropped Daniel's email address in the chat one more time in case any of you didn't grab it earlier. Thank you so much, Daniel. You're welcome to stay and listen, or if you want to go and you have somewhere else to be, that's just fine.
I'm going to go grab lunch.
Nice. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you all.
Okay, everyone. We are going to jump right in and talk a little bit about General Assembly. Let me just get my screen back on. Okay. So as I think you all know by now, we are nearing day by day closer to 2026 General Assembly. September 19th is just 39 days away. So we're going to jump in with a couple reminders. And then after that, I'm going to ask Nikki Tech from Oak Harbor to share a great resource that she shared with us that I think could be helpful for you all to know about. And we'll just check in and see where we're at in time after that. Okay, so wanted to remind you of a couple things that many of you have seen already. If you read our member updates that come out on Friday. First and foremost is that district RSVP is out there and floating. We'll make sure those links get sent to you in the follow-up email from today's meeting. But if your district hasn't yet, please RSVP for the General Assembly if you're planning to participate. It's not required, but it would be really helpful for us just to have a sense of who and how many districts are planning to participate. All board chairs and legislative representatives on boards will receive your district's login credentials, whether or not you've RSVP'd, but we'd really appreciate a quick RSVP from you at some point in the next few weeks. Thank you to those of you that were on it and have done it already. Additionally, a new sort of opportunity or option that we're offering this year is around assembly meetups. This is something that boards across the state may choose to do, where essentially boards have the opportunity to decide that maybe they want to sit in the same room to participate at General Assembly in your own location. There is a web link that I'll make sure gets out to you today too that sort of describes what that opportunity could look like, what some of the implications might be for you as a board that could host a meetup or a board that might participate in a meetup. And then if that's something that you and a handful of other boards might want to do, you will need to let us know ahead of the assembly so that we can prepare technology on our end accordingly. So just wanted to remind you that that information is out there. Again, both the RSVP and the meetup information have been communicated in our member updates. Just wanted to sort of flag those for you here as well. And then just flipping to our key dates, you have seen this slide a number of times before, but since we've been together last, we did sort of check one of the boxes, meaning that the amendment window that was open between August 1st and August 7th has now closed. In total, during that week, we received 4 amendment proposals that will be added into the General Assembly Handbook. And so what that means you can anticipate next is the final handbook that includes those amendment proposals will be released to all WSSDA members in not that far away on August 19th. So just wanted to flag for you that that's what's up next. And then also the WSSDA caucus meetings that will be held in sort of conjunction with General Assembly. That's the Small Schools Forum, the Large Schools Caucus, and the School Directors of Color Caucus. Those meetings will happen between September 14th, 15th, and 16th. So that's the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday on the week of General Assembly. More information about how to register for those will be coming out in our member update. So be watching for that. And then, of course, General Assembly is on Saturday, September 19th, starting at 8 a.m. So please make sure that's on your calendars if it's not yet. You know, our goal every year is to increase the number of districts that are participating all the way up to 295. Okay. I am now going to pause. If you all have any questions about any of those General Assembly updates, please just drop them in the chat. I'll go to those in a bit. And I'll ask Nikki to jump in and share a little bit about this really great tool that her district made. So Nikki, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Tesh. I'm a school board director for Oak Harbor School District. And then I work for Anacortes School District in the superintendent's office. And I assist the school board in Anacortes. So this was a resource that I put together not only for my board position, but for our legislative director on our board to make General Assembly a tiny bit easier. Over the years of going to General Assembly, it was hard for me to explain how General Assembly worked and how things landed. So I created a spreadsheet that is done page by page, that I can actually do ahead in advance and mark where my board is leaning. So I have shared in the chat a document that I am happy to share with all of you. Please just make a copy of the general document. And once you're in there, you can kind of see how it works, the different elements that I've included. You'll see the page number of the handbook. Now, keep in mind this does not have the August 19th updates in it, but I will update this exact link after the August 19th handbook updates are done, and I'm happy to give that to you. So when you go to the sheet, it'll say the category and title, and then I'll just put an X on pass or do not pass. And then there's a little drop-down menu in the document that says the final result of how General Assembly landed on that proposal, whether or not it passed, it did not pass. And then there's also a section if you want to take notes to report back to your board. So this is just a tool that I geeked out on because I wanted to track it. There's nothing fancy. It's simple, but it allows for the transparency of what I'm doing at General Assembly to share it with my board, and also share it with the general public about where Oak Harbor's interests are for this particular school year. I am open to questions if you guys have any. It's just a geeky spreadsheet, but I thought it might be a tool that all of you could use.
Thanks, Nikki. This is so great. And, sort of in taking inspiration from this, I think, like you said, it's a really great way to sort of keep track of things. One question that I would ask for you while we're waiting for some to come in the chat is, how might you use something like this with your fellow board members to essentially decide which way your board may or may not be leaning? I know there's been a version of something like this that WSSDA has put out in the past that had individual columns for like board member 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where people could use that and kind of take notes that way. But how have you used this to kind of gather feedback from your board members?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So my board voted me as the legislative representative. So in actions like this, if there's a note of contention on our board where we're kind of leaning different ways on issues, I think I'll go through the board chair to get the board's interest on that particular item. But for the most part, as the legislative rep, I kind of have a pretty good idea of where our board stands on the majority of these issues. So I meet with our board president and our superintendent, and we obviously look at WSSDA's recommendations. Sometimes I'll even populate WSSDA's recommendations. If there's anything contentious that we need to talk about in the handbook, I will bring that to the meeting with our superintendent and our board president. We'll go through them, but it's been pretty easy, and I can kind of even look at the previous year of where we landed. But I haven't seen any of the new edits, so I'm not sure yet. But that's kind of how we do it at our district. We've done the work session where people vote, but it pretty much just lands where we landed in the previous year because we have the same board. We'll probably have to do that exercise if we go through an election and have a new board member. But yeah, that's kind of how we do it in Oak Harbor.
Lovely. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much. You're getting lots of love in the chat if you're not
Oh,
seeing that.
thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
folks really appreciate it.
The other thing too that you guys can't really see, but obviously this is a Google Doc. There's tabs at the bottom. If you want to kind of track the previous years, you just make a new tab for every year and copy the sheet. So you could keep a template on one and then create a new sheet for 2026. So currently I have from 2023 and on, and I can see exactly where my board landed on things that we wanted to pass or do not pass, as well as the WSSDA final result. So I have that whole book to be able to share that history with my board too.
That's cool. Great. Thanks so much, Nikki. This is really helpful. And if you, when you update this post the August 19th amendments, would I have your permission to just share the link out again with the network so that folks have it handy?
I shared it with you to make everyone else's life easier. We're all
Lovely.
busy people and board directors, and anything that we can do to help each other, that's what we're here for.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Okay. We are going to move right along. Actually, wait. I do see one question in the chat about outside of a work session, how might this be shared with fellow board members without violating PDC? Is there anything top of mind, Nikki, that you would offer there?
Yeah. So this is unique because I do this position for work as well. So I assist the school board in Anacortes. So if I'm going to share this document with the board, just so that they can have a look at it of where we land for General Assembly, I'll send it to the assistant to the superintendent for distribution. But like I said, I typically just meet with the board president and the superintendent to be able to like show them what I've gathered and see if there's any hiccups throughout the document that they think I should kind of like engage with the other board directors. If I do that engagement on those items, I make individual phone calls so that I'm not in violation of any PDC.
Great. Thanks so much, Nikki. I think the chat's clear. Really appreciate your time and the resource. Really thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining. Okay, y'all, it is 12:56. We are going to just move through these slides here really quick and get you out on your way. What I want to remind you of in our last couple of minutes is our story and data bank form. Again, this is a new resource that we shared with you for the first time, I think 2 meetings ago. This is our sort of test interim to see how this works. But, you know, one of Cynthia and I's goals in supporting your strategic advocacy work with WSSDA is to help us show lawmakers the tangible impacts of their decisions. And what helps us to do that is getting specifics from you all. And what might specifics be? Maybe it's some financial data from your district about how much money you're spending on particular unfunded mandates. Or maybe it's sort of the funding hole, which is what is your district not able to do that you should be or want to be doing as a result of being underfunded in some ways through the formula. When you all can provide us some of that information, it'll help us make that much better resources for you all to share with your legislators and for us to share with your legislators and everyone's legislators for that matter, to sort of better reflect the need for some of our policy priorities. We would really appreciate if you all could get into this form and consider filling it out and sharing some resources with us. We will make sure this link comes once again in the email follow-up, but just wanted to flag that this is out there. And the more responses we can get from you all across the state, the better and more refined resources we can produce for you this fall as we prepare for the legislative session. So I'll say thank you in advance for considering taking a look at this form. Okay, and with that, you're going to get out of here 2 minutes early today. Our next meeting of the Advocacy Action Network is on September 11th. That meeting will run for 90 minutes from 12 o'clock until 1:30. Keep in mind that is the week prior to General Assembly. And during that meeting, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to hear from our colleagues at OSPI about some of their decision packages and legislative priorities for the 2027 session. They will be literally hot off the press by September 11th. And so we'll have some time to do some Q&A with OSPI. And then after that, we'll dive in a little bit deeper to General Assembly and sort of the prep that you all might need. We'll walk through some examples of how to use our electronic platform, let y'all have some Q&A, etc. So hope you'll join us there. Thank you for engaging. Have a lovely start to your school year for those of you that start before the 11th, and take care, everyone.